How's it going, Spare Parts Army? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. We're now 3 weeks into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and at this point, I think we really need to talk about something that is wrecking our ability to see this war accurately. I'm talking, of course, about the dreaded fog of war. War fog smells terrible. A lot of people are in a state of confusion about what's happening in the war right now, thanks to echo chambers created by our social media platforms, and propaganda clearly coming from all of this. In the US, where I am, it's very difficult to factor in reports of Russian victories into my analysis. This is because either no one wants to find that information, or they're too afraid to share it, worried that they'll look pro-Russian. I want to warn you, if you want some cheerleading video about how great the Russian army is, or how great the Ukrainian army is, then this video is not for you. This is for people who want to cut through the fog of war and understand the reality in Ukraine.
Later in the video, we'll have an updated analysis of the 40-mile-long convoy, and we'll see if my initial assessment was correct or not.
So to be fair, a major reason why it's difficult for us to clearly see through the fog of war, to accurately see the Russian army's victories, is because Putin himself has made it punishable by up to 15 years in jail to speak negatively about the war in Russia. The other reason we're mainly seeing pro-Ukrainian information about the war is because on March 4th, US media companies decided to clamp down and shut down our access to Russian media outlets because they were deemed misinformation. Personally, I think we're smart enough to figure that out, to figure the truth out for ourselves, but maybe not. After all, I am the same guy that tried throwing a bucket of water on an electrical fire in Iraq. For instance, take a look at the Ukraine live conflict map that we've been using. It's important to note that this is populated entirely by pro-Ukrainian sources. That's what fills out all of the information in here. So even though this is accurate intelligence, the picture that we get inevitably is going to be skewed in one direction. I believe the consequence of this is that we might underestimate the Russian military. This conflict map does not directly account for any of the Russian military victories. It will show us the location of destroyed Russian tanks, but it will not show us the evidence of destroyed Ukrainian equipment. So what I was able to do was dig deeper and look at some weird Telegram channels where I was able to find the Russian perspective and evidence of some of their victories. That's right, I get put on all the FBI lists so you don't have to. In my research, I located evidence of Russian military successes that I think were missing from the legacy media's analysis of the war. In the south of Ukraine, here we see an entire Ukrainian base, abandoned, with all of the armored tanks and vehicles left near the city of Kherson. On March 15th, there was abandoned and destroyed Ukrainian tanks on the highway right outside of the city.
But if you're anything like me and you get your news from TV and Twitter, this is probably shocking to you. We have reports of Russian special forces running patrols throughout this city, moving 500 kilometers north to the Chernihiv region.
There's footage from Russian drone strikes, destroying Ukrainian artillery positions. These are all scenes that I think people in the United States, like me, never have access to in our closed-off bubbles of social media. In the Donbass region, there's photographic evidence that the Russian army has captured an untold number of US Javelin anti-tank missile systems, which will now be used against us.
But looking at this live map, we would completely miss those reports because they don't include pro-Russian information.
The Russian army doesn't have anything nearly as sophisticated or effective as the Javelin system in their own arsenal. They don't have any of the high-tech infrared, lock-on, fire and forget, top-down attack mode abilities. When Russian troops find them, they're already calling them trophy weapons. According to the Russian military, this Ukrainian armored tank column in Donbass region was destroyed by the Russian army using their grenade launchers on the tracks to disable them. I strongly believe that you deserve to hear the full story of what's happening on the ground.
Don't trust me yet? Maybe this footage of me surfing the web looking pensively at articles on my computer will change your mind. No? How about me reading printed out pieces of paper? Surely now I'm a trustworthy news source.
On March 4th, a civilian news broadcast from the airport near Hostomel shows that the Russian army has secured the airfield about 40 kilometers from the center of the city.
Now if we move 500 kilometers down to the south of the country,
here we see how in the Donbass region the Russians are handing over captured Ukrainian vehicles to pro-Russian forces to use. Look at all the Soviet flags flying on these vehicles. Can we stop pretending at this point that Putin isn't trying to put the old Soviet Union back together? Can we stop pretending that NATO expansion is bad? What if we didn't let Poland join NATO? Is it more likely that Russia would behave, or would they have just been looking to snatch that sweet, sweet land up? This morning, Russian sources released video footage of their artillery shelling operations near the capital. They also released a detailed map that they captured showing all of the Ukrainian army's defense locations surrounding the city, but I've chosen not to disclose that information. The point is, the Russians have it.
You take a quick look at the map from last week compared to this week. The Russian forces have made progress along every axis of advance. They haven't been pushed back or repelled really anywhere yet.
To me, these advances are more compelling intelligence than someone telling me on TV that the Russians have low morale in their units. Of course there's low morale in the Russian units. Have you ever heard a soldier talk before? All we do is complain. I think it's too hot. You know what? It's too cold. When are we going home? Where are we sleeping? Sleeping in the back of the vehicle sucks. If you're in the military and your morale isn't terrible, then you're either not in the infantry or you're not deployed. Believe me, they had to keep us from attacking each other in Iraq, let alone the enemy. On Thursday, March 10th, cloud cover over Ukraine broke, and it gave the Maxar satellite images another look at the 40-mile-long Russian army convoy just north of Kiev. Everyone was fixated on the fact that these vehicles had redeployed and moved under tree cover, and they completely missed the really valuable information here. Sometimes we can get more information by analyzing what we don't see. So these new images do not show us burning Russian vehicles. We do not see smoking, smoldering, destroyed Russian convoy. It's instead moved off the road into defensive positions under trees and into nearby towns. This tells us that the Ukrainian military either chose not to attack it, or they were unable to attack this big, fat, sitting duck.
The media is already starting to admit that this isn't a stalled convoy. Just look here at where the blue line ends, that's where the convoy ends. You can clearly see that this supply convoy can't go any further without advancing past where the combat divisions are.
US intelligence officials from the Pentagon and the Department of Defense say that this convoy is largely made up of non-combat supply trucks. They're carrying fuel, food, and ammo.
Is it just me, or is John Kirby over at the Pentagon one handsome devil?
Some people see this 40-mile-long convoy as a massive military blunder, and in many ways, they're not wrong.
With the fog of war, the situation is constantly changing, and tomorrow, the whole convoy could get destroyed for all we know.
The Russian army, in their attempt to quickly take Kiev, has failed to successfully secure large regions in their rear. This means it could be difficult for this convoy to advance to the divisions that are battling into Kiev safely. If the convoy went further south, they would be at risk of being attacked by the Ukrainian special forces in that area. We know the most elite Ukrainian units are operating just north of Kiev and have been working to attack supply lines, which has helped to slow down the Russian advance. The Ukrainian General of Staff, whose reports have been largely accurate so far, if only a little bit biased, he had something to say about why the Russian convoy was pausing and taking defensive positions. He says the Russian engineer units are working to create a network of field pipelines in the territory that they currently occupy. The Russian military's plan, it appears to be that they want to connect these pipes to a central oil pipeline in Belarus, where they can pump fuel to any of their tank divisions near Kiev. In the meantime, Ukrainian farmers now find themselves in the front lines of this battle. Military intelligence reported on March 14th that Russian forces are seizing farming machinery for these engineering projects so that they could help with this pipeline and help construct fortifications. In response, Ukraine farmers seem to be striking back by using their own tractor trailers to capture and tow Russian tanks away from them. This has now become a thing, where Ukrainian tractors are pulling away tanks. There's dozens of these videos. I feel like there's a really great country music song opportunity here.
In Ukraine, I've got two things that I love: my dear tractor trailer and my captured Russian T-72 main battle tank. It's got a V12 diesel-powered engine. My girl, well, she ain't too sweet on my Russian armored vehicles sitting on the farm. Well, shucks. I tell her Vladimir Putin can come and get her himself. No, I'm not giving away my Russian tank. It's got a souped-up 780 horsepower engine. Yeehaw! Can I get a hooah?
During the third week of the invasion, the Russian forces have taken an operational pause, which was something that the US military had to do in their invasion of Iraq. If we look at the east of Kiev, a Russian armored column last week made a push towards Brovary, which would put them in striking distance of the capital. If they can capture that town, they'll be one step closer to encircling the capital. The Ukrainian military likely had this road zoned in as a kill zone weeks ahead of time, and I'll tell you why I think that in a second. So they'd set up a complex ambush waiting for the Russian army just to roll right in. We see the Ukrainians attack with artillery and possibly drone fire from the sky, maybe even tanks out of frame. The way this column reacts to contact is really terrible, because they bunch up close to each other, blocking one another, making it very difficult to retreat. So we can see this column was attacked once they had pushed into the town, out of all the farmland in the background there. This town then acts as a natural physical block, preventing the tanks from escaping the kill zone off to the side of the road. They're forced into this narrow zone of fire. This is a textbook procedure by the Ukrainian army for a successful ambush. It's been reported that the Russians lost a general in this attack, which is a really high up officer, and it destroys their command and control. It hasn't been confirmed yet though. Something interesting to note here is, why are they doing this massive armored troop movement in broad daylight? It's likely because even the Russian armored vehicles lack sufficient night thermal imaging devices, and they believe that it's safer for them to travel in the day, which goes against everything that the US military doctrine follows. Moving in daylight makes them a huge target for Ukrainian artillery strikes. Hopefully the US is sending night vision goggles and thermal optics to Ukrainian soldiers, because this looks like a major weakness of the Russian army. Another mistake made here is that the Russians didn't follow basic combined operations doctrine, which requires good coordination and communication skills. Having air cover to counter the Ukrainian artillery would have been huge. They also didn't have artillery pieces set up to provide counter battery missions. Combined operations is kind of like rock, paper, scissors. You gotta have all the pieces, or you're gonna get destroyed. Open source intelligence assets were able to intercept the Russian military's encrypted radio communications from this attack. And when it's translated, they tell us something very interesting about the average Russian soldier's psychological state in the war that no one's really touched on yet. The translated conversation is as follows. Hello Nitro, it's Udar, listening to you. What? 6th Regiment, can't report right now, still gathering info. A lot of losses. They waited for us. Ambushed commander of the regiment is killed. Checking about the other. As soon as you get the information, gather everything, report to me, understood? They strike with artillery, tanks, UAV. As to my understanding, Bayraktars. Checking on the other losses. This is the Russian soldiers reporting back to command with the status of their failed advance. The fact that they're so certain in their communications that it's a Bayraktar drone that targeted them is kind of fascinating to me, because it appears like they never saw one of those drones with their own eyes. And if they did see one, why weren't they able to attempt to shoot it down or target it? The Russian soldiers communicating here over the radio probably simply assumed it was a Bayraktar drone because there's been a lot of publicity around them, and they're a terrifying concept to the average soldier on the ground. Think about it. For your regular Russian soldier, the concept of being hit by some unseen drone is terrifying. It's similar to the psychological effect that improvised explosive devices had on me and other US troops in Iraq. Now, if we move slightly north of this location, there was another attack on this same column of Russian armor by Ukrainian armed forces. Here they used the British NLAW anti-tank missile system. It instantly explodes directly above the tank, knocking it out of commission. This column's reaction to contact is completely different. They react in a much more organized and effective way by instantly identifying which side of the road the attack came from and returning fire in the correct direction. All of the tanks then got out of the kill zone, off the road, and they made themselves harder to hit, and they avoided any landmines that might have been placed in that kill zone. Most of the Russian infantry here, they made a big mistake though, by running away from the direction of the incoming fire. What they should have done is run directly to the closest cover, even if it meant the direction of the incoming fire. You never want to turn your back and run away from the incoming fire, because that makes you vulnerable. But on a whole, a much better performance by the Russian military here. 15 hours ago, today, on March 15th, there's been new ground attacks on the west side of Kiev. We can see over the past week, Russian forces have moved into this area because that's where the main supply route from the town of Lviv, near Poland, comes from. Once the Russians cut off this road, it will take an additional 4 hours to ship supplies in from the west using alternate routes that come into Kiev from the south.
Looks like Google Maps has already started to reroute traffic away from that area where the Russians have moved into.
So Lviv, where this supply route heads to, was recently attacked on March 10th with 30 Russian cruise missiles that hit a military base there. The city is 25 kilometers from the border with Poland, The attack killed at least 35 people. Russia claims it killed 180 foreign mercenaries that are stationed there. It's been kind of like a staging area and coordination location for all of the aid efforts from NATO. It's also been where US and British citizens, for instance, with the people who have volunteered to fight against Russia, they've all gone there to link up before heading into the combat zones in eastern Ukraine. This attack appears to be a message to the US to tell them to stop sending supplies to Ukraine. Based on how the war has progressed in the last week, it appears like it'll take Russian forces another week to encircle the capital and another 2 weeks to assault. At this rate, unless something is done to stop them, we will likely see the fall of Kiev by the end of April. To the east in Kharkiv, the second largest city in the country. Over the past few episodes, I've shown a lot of the Ukrainian armed forces' perspective of what's happening there. According to the Russians, they've captured a portion of the Territorial Defense Unit and the 81st Air Mobile Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which have withdrawn from the city at this point, according to them.
Kharkiv is important because if it's captured, it'll open up the possibility for the Russian military to encircle all of the Ukrainian forces in the Donbas region. Another important development coming out of Kharkiv is that the Russian military has provided video evidence that they've set up successful refueling operations in the area.
On March 10th, the Russian government officials admitted something that confirmed an early suspicion of mine. They are using untrained, young conscripts in the war who likely do not want to be there and were forced against their will to fight in Ukraine. There are a few theories surrounding the use of conscripts. Some claim that they're purposely sent in first as cannon fodder. Even one Ukrainian who was interviewed
said, quote, "At first they seemed to be sending in people they weren't afraid of losing. But then I was hiding in a basement. The Russians who found us were serious, well-equipped with torches and full communication, basically special forces."
So it could be the case that the professionals wanted the conscripts to go in like guinea pigs to test the level of Ukrainian resistance. Another theory there is that they were accidentally sent in due to a miscommunication because there would be no real military advantage to sending in less trained troops first.
Can you comment on, or do you have any insights on the recent developments regarding Russia's use of conscripted troops? Can you confirm that they've recalled some of these forces and that their deployment to the front lines was seemingly the result of some kind of mistake?
Well, I mean, we certainly have seen that that some of the initial battalion tactical groups that were sent into Ukraine in the early days had conscripts in the force.
Can John Kirby get an unironic hua from us? Sir, if you're watching this, I'm not even kidding. I love the way you answer questions.
On March 9th, we got more evidence that contradicts Putin's claims that the invasion is going according to plan. This new evidence suggests that he's had a major initial miscalculation with the invasion, and he expected a swift victory in a few days, because he reportedly placed the leader of the SFB, their own head of intelligence, under house arrest for giving him false information about the situation in Ukraine, which led to an initial stumble by the Russian army there. Analysts believe Putin has surrounded himself with bureaucrats who told him what he wanted to hear and not what he needed to hear.
In this tense exchange with his inner circle, you can see Putin belittling his own team, telling them to speak plainly, demanding that they not mince words, which makes us suspect that maybe things aren't going well.
Hopefully, that piece of information helps explain why I want to show you the truth about the war. I want to show you the Russian victories as well as the Ukrainian ones, because without that, we'll be like Putin, making flawed decisions based on incorrect information. But there is a growing problem facing the Russians that they're going to have to start to account for. They've flattened these cities and killed much of the population that they're going to have to actually start to feed and give water to these people and help these people who are still left alive. The Russian Ministry of Defense has released footage of these soldiers handing out supplies to local populations. Footage like this it's kind of difficult for me to process because it reminds me of missions that I went on in Iraq, where I would hand out food and water to the local population in towns that had been destroyed from years of war. I'm not saying that these conflicts are comparable, only pointing out that it kind of makes my stomach turn to see this kind of propaganda from the Russian media, and at the same time, know that I've been in similar operations firsthand myself. In order to catch more of a glimpse behind the Iron Curtain, the Russian Ministry of Defense, they released this footage of the Su-25 fixed-wing fighter jet, which took damage from an incoming Ukrainian surface-to-air man-pad missile system, but it was still able to hobble back to base. This tells us that the war for the air superiority continues to wage over Ukraine, which is good news for the Ukrainian armed forces. There's plenty of evidence out there to support the claim that Russia is in way over their heads. For instance, the US Department of Defense says that Russia is asking China for military and financial aid for the Ukrainian war. Both China and Russia denied this on March 13th. At the same time, China's left the door open for sending aid by stating that China will not promise and cannot be made to not export arms to Russia. The fact that there's no reason to believe the 40-mile-long convoy has started to distribute any of its supplies to the Russian divisions south of them is not a good sign for them. The rate of airplanes and tanks that we know have been destroyed is not good news for Russia. The fact that they've been unable to launch attacks larger than a regimental advance near Kiev suggests that they're uncoordinated between branches and they lack clear communication to headquarters. The point of this video was not to dampen our hope of the Ukrainian armed forces repelling the attack. I simply want to give a more balanced picture of the war, especially as we appear to be getting closer and closer to joining it. There is a massively popular video with 21 million views on YouTube by this well-spoken, very smart professor who lays out an incredibly convincing argument about why NATO is at fault for the entire situation in Ukraine. He makes the assumption in this argument that if NATO hadn't expanded, then Russia wouldn't have expanded either. I believe if NATO didn't expand east, then Russia would have taken over Latvia and the Baltic states already, and that's not what those people want.
You might notice that he also very quickly hand waves how Putin's a dictator and says, well, democracy's terrible too.
It's easy to say democracy is terrible and no one should have the right to join NATO when you have freedom yourself. So this isn't a pro-Russia propaganda video, it's me saying that we need to know where the Russian military is having success in order to avoid being surprised by them. Because if we don't, then we will underestimate them and be less likely to understand how important it is that NATO continues to send fuel, ammo, and weapons. To me, it's a little bit disappointing that we've chosen to shut down those Russian sites so that we can't get insight into what they're thinking. I understand the argument, but it just seems like a step closer to war because when you go back and you start seeing when free speech starts to get pushed down, it's usually when freedom is less important and we all have to band together and act as a team to fight a common enemy. That's when freedoms get sacrificed. So that scares me that maybe are we already at a point where we need to sacrifice our freedom of speech in order to band together to defeat a common enemy.